Can I talk to you for a minute?
Sure.
Would you excuse me for just 1 second?
Would you excuse me a minute?
Would you please excuse me? No, don't get up.
Would you excuse me for just a minute?
Would you excuse me for just a moment?
Would you excuse me?
Would you excuse me, madame?
Would you excuse me a minute? I'll be right back.
Would you excuse me?
Would you excuse me?
Would you excuse me?
Would you excuse me?
Would you excuse me, Mrs. Farnsworth?
Yes, of course, Mr. Abbott.
Would you excuse me for a moment? I'll be right back. I just have to go to the, little girls' room.
Of course. Would you excuse me just for 1 second? I'll be right back.
Would you excuse me for a moment?
Would you excuse me for 1 moment, Simon?
Would you excuse me for a moment?
Would you excuse me for 1 second?
Sure.
Would you excuse me for a moment?
Would you excuse me for a minute?
Please excuse me for a moment.
Would you excuse me?
Would you excuse me a moment?
Oh, you don't need to, Mr. Degas.
Would you excuse me?
Would you excuse me for a moment? I'd just like to be alone with my husband.
Certainly.
Thank you.
Would you excuse me for a moment, please?
Would you excuse me, sir?
Would you excuse me?
Would you excuse me, please? Would you excuse me, Warden?
Would you excuse me?
What for? You haven't done anything.
Would you excuse me?
Would you excuse me?
Would you excuse me a moment while I put this away, please?
Would you excuse me, please? I have a great many things to do.
Would you excuse me?
And there, a mechanical wonder allowed me to see the sun rise for the first time in 200 years. And what sunrises? Seen as the human eye could never see them. Silver at first. Then, as the years progressed, in tones of purple, red, and by long lost blue.